Welcome to 1349, the year the bells rang more for burials than for births. The year the sun came up, but fewer and fewer people did. If this voice finds you tonight, maybe it was meant to. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories they forgot to write down. I didn't ask to be a gravedigger. No one does, not really. No child holds a wooden spade and dreams of digging holes for the fallen. We dream of horses, of harvests, of strong backs and full tables. I dreamed of surviving winter with all 10 fingers. But then the last gravedigger vanished, or died, or drank too much and wandered into the marsh, depending on who you asked. He was an old man with a back like a question mark and fingernails packed so full of dirt they might have been growing their own crops. When he stopped showing up at the churchyard, the priest asked around. And by asked, I mean he looked in my direction and nodded. That was it. That was my appointment. No training, no ceremony, no choice. I was 19, too skinny to lift a full pail without tilting sideways, too quiet to be missed when the bread was passed around, and too unlucky to dodge the eyes of a priest whose fingers never touched soil. He said God would reward me for my service. I remember looking down at the spade he handed me and wondering if God knew what rot smelled like. The shovel was heavier than I expected, worn smooth at the handle with a blade that had dug more death than I'd seen in life. I held it the way you hold something you're not sure you're allowed to drop. The first morning I arrived before dawn because no one told me when to start, and I figured the dead weren't going to wait. The churchyard looked different in the dark, softer, quieter, as if the stones slept too. But the smell didn't sleep. It never did. Even when the wind was still, the air clung with something sour and cold. Not quite decay, not quite mold, just grief maybe. Pressed into the grass, there were 3 bodies waiting. One was a woman I'd seen once or twice in the square. She sold ribbons, or maybe she just wore them. Another was a boy, couldn't have been older than 12. His lips were blue, not from death, I thought, but from the cold that got there first. The third was already wrapped, a linen shroud pulled tight like a secret. I didn't know where to put them. The priest eventually came out, waved vaguely at the far end of the yard, and went back inside. His boots never touched the frost. I started digging. The soil was stiff, dry near the top but wet underneath, like it hadn't made up its mind whether it wanted to freeze or weep. My hands blistered before the hole was half deep. The metal caught the morning light briefly, like it didn't belong down there, and maybe it didn't. Maybe none of us did. I tried not to look at their faces. You learn that early, not to look too long. Because once you do, the mind begins to whisper names or worse, questions. And there's no room for questions in the grave. I remember the sound it made when I rolled the first body in. A soft thud, not dramatic, not like the stories, just final, the kind of sound that doesn't echo because it doesn't need to. The earth took her like it expected her. By the time the third body was covered, my arms were jelly and my stomach hollow. No one brought food, no one thanked me, but the priest left a single coin on the chapel step. Copper, not enough to buy meat, just enough to say, we saw what you did and we won't speak of it again. The days after that blurred. Dig, sweat, drop, cover. Dig, sweat, drop, cover, sometimes 6 a day, sometimes 2. Once none, and that terrified me more than the busy days. Made me wonder what was waiting on the other side of the village gate. I started sleeping with dirt beneath my fingernails and the scent of it in my nose. I woke thinking of worms and root tangles. I stopped dreaming altogether, as if the sleep knew better than to offer hope. People began to avoid me. At first, they nodded politely in the street, stepping around me like I carried a sack of manure. Then the nods stopped, then the glances. Eventually, I could walk through the center of town without anyone making eye contact. It was almost impressive the way people can pretend you're invisible when your job is to handle the proof that we're not. There was one girl, Elspeth, who used to bring bread to the church door. She never said much, just left it on a flat stone and hurried off. But once she stayed long enough to say, "Do you ever pray for them?" I lied and said yes. But the truth was I didn't know how, not properly, not like the priests. I said things, whispered into the holes before they filled. Words like, "I'm sorry," or "You're not the worst thing I've buried today," or "If someone loved you, I hope they remember how." Maybe that counted, maybe not. The worst part wasn't the digging, it wasn't even the dead, it was the silence. The silence that stuck to your skin after the job was done, that followed you home like wet wool. You learn to live with it, talk to yourself, hum things with no tune, count the steps between graves just to hear numbers aloud. The world shrank, my world at least. It became the distance between my shovel and the hole, between my breath and the cold morning fog, between the last person I spoke to and the next one I'd bury. And still they came. The sick, the nameless, the ones they left outside the chapel at night with nothing but a torn shawl or a scratched token to hint they'd ever been loved. Some had teeth that gritted even in death. Some looked peaceful, like the fever had carried them gently. I didn't ask for their stories, but I made up my own. That one was a baker, I'd say. She made honey bread and sang to herself. That man was a carpenter, built a cradle, then died before the child could sleep in it. That boy once chased a red ribbon through the snow, laughing so hard he scared the crows away. Maybe none of it was true. Maybe it was better that way. I kept digging. My shoulders hardened. My hands stopped bleeding. My back began to hum with a pain that no posture could soothe. And the shovel, once foreign, started to feel like part of me, like a limb I hadn't known I'd grown. They say every tool remembers its use. I wonder if the shovel remembered me. There were days I wished to be sick, not dead, just enough to stop. To be allowed rest. But the village had run out of men willing to get close to death, and I had already crossed that line, hadn't I? There's a moment, just before the last spade of dirt, when the air changes. When the grave feels like it might hold more than flesh, like it remembers every name it never spoke aloud. I began to fear that silence more than I feared the dead. Still I stayed, not because I believed in some divine reward, not because I was brave, but because by then no one else would. And because somewhere in that quiet, beneath the weight of the earth, I started to hear something I hadn't before. My own voice. Cracked, thin, but there, and that was enough, for a while, just enough. I used to think the dead were the ones I should be afraid of. It made sense at first, the way the bodies stiffened, the way some of them moved, not by their own doing, of course, just gases, settling, twitching. A last breath caught somewhere it had no business staying. But the first time a hand shifted as I lowered it into the earth, I nearly threw myself in after it. Thought I was being grabbed, claimed. It wasn't the hand, it was my mind. And yet, in all my time digging, I never heard a dead man curse me. Never heard one call me unclean. That was the job of the living. They say the gravedigger is necessary, noble, even. The priest would sometimes mutter something about sacred duty, but he never offered me water or shade or looked me full in the face. Because once your hands know how to touch the dead, they forget how to be shaken. The villagers avoided me like I was contagious. Worse than plague, at least that had the decency to kill you quick. Me, I lingered, reminded them of what came after, what waited beneath the prayer and the perfume, and I saw them, watching from behind shutters, behind chapel pews, behind veils and fingers and fear, watching me dig. I started digging in rhythm. 1-2, lift. 1-2, drop. You find a tempo after a while. Your muscles remember the arc of the blade, the weight of soil. Some mornings I'd hum to keep pace, not songs, just low sounds like a forgotten chant. The dirt changed by season. Spring dirt was greedy, wet and heavy, like it didn't want to let go. Summer dirt baked hard, resisting every cut like cracked leather. Autumn was kinder, soft and yielding, but filled with roots that curled like veins through the ground. And winter dirt fought back. It clung to its dead like a miser. Sometimes I had to pour hot water just to soften the first layer. Other times I broke the ground with the butt of the shovel until it cracked like bone. My hands became strangers to me. They blistered, bled, split, healed, then blistered again. The skin thickened until I could barely feel anything but the cold. My nails darkened from rot and soil. Once a splinter of bone lodged itself beneath my thumbnail. I didn't feel it until it festered, had to dig it out with a rusted fishhook. That was the first time I wondered if the dead left something behind in you, not a curse, just a little piece. Something they didn't need anymore. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? The priest would have called it penance. The villagers would have whispered about demons. My mother, God rest her, might have wept, but she was long buried herself, not by me, thank God. That was before I carried the shovel. The thing about digging is it's quiet, not just the lack of voices, but the way it hushes everything else. It narrows your world. You stop noticing the birds, the bells, the wind. You hear instead the sigh of turned earth, the scrape of stone, the rustle of linen, the soft pop of air leaving a loosened rib cage. You begin to admire it, the dirt. It doesn't judge you, doesn't pretend to be clean. It takes what it's given and makes no complaint, just swallows and settles. I used to run my fingers through it after I finished, not in any holy way, just to feel something. The way children touch sand before they know it gets in their teeth. There's a softness to grave dirt, especially the older parts of the yard. The soil's been churned so many times it practically sighs under your hand. Sometimes I'd find old bits, not from my own burials, but the ones before me, a splintered tooth, a nail. Once, the corner of a carved comb still etched with a pattern like waves. I left them where I found them, returned them. It felt wrong to keep them, like stealing a name. The priest said I should focus on the soul, not the flesh. Easy for him to say. He never had to pull a bloated corpse from a flooded ditch. Never had to lift a body that fell apart midway, too soft with rot to hold its own shape. There was a man, I remember him well, brought to me wrapped in sailcloth, still dripping from the river. No ceremony, just dropped on the ground like a sack of oats. I opened the cloth and the smell hit first, then the face, or what was left of it. The fish had been kinder than the fever, I'll say that. As I dug, a group of townsfolk walked by. They didn't speak, didn't stop, but one of them spat in the dirt, not toward the man, toward me. Like I was the one who'd done the drowning. There's a sort of madness that comes with being watched but never seen. I became something between shadow and superstition. Children whispered stories about me, that I spoke to skulls, that I slept in graves, that I never blinked. They weren't far off. I did speak sometimes. Not to skulls, but near them. I'd ask the same question again and again, was it worth it? The living don't know how to answer that. But the dead are honest. Their silence doesn't change. That's the part people don't understand. It's not just the work, it's the knowing how many hands it takes to lower a body, how much soil it takes to hide a man, how long it takes before the smell fades, knowing that death isn't tidy, it's not poetic, it leaks, it swells. It stains. I used to imagine I was somewhere else, when the ache in my spine made me stagger, when the shovel shook in my grip, when my lungs burned from breathing through a kerchief soaked in vinegar just to keep the stink from crawling inside. I'd close my eyes and pretend I was digging a garden, that this was for spring peas, that the hole was for water, not sorrow, that the flies meant honey, not flesh, but the dirt always reminded me, dirt doesn't care if you're holy. Doesn't care if you wore a crown or rags, if you prayed or stole or kissed your mother's hand before you left. It takes you the same. And it takes the one who holds the shovel, too, not all at once. That would be a mercy. No, it peels you bit by bit, your body first, then your name, then the part of you that hoped someone might ask what your favorite season was or whether you liked to dance before the frost came. I liked autumn. The air was dry, the dirt gentle. The trees made everything gold for a while, like the world was trying to remember how to be beautiful before it went cold again. I'd sometimes pause during a dig, lean on the handle, and watch the leaves fall across the graves, like confetti at a wedding no one showed up for. Once a crow landed near me, bold and glossy. It cocked its head like it was trying to understand what I was doing. Then it stole the cloth from a body's face and flew off with it. I laughed. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, even in death you weren't safe from being scavenged. There were days I dug when my arms shook so hard I thought I'd drop the shovel. But I kept going, not because of duty, not because of faith, but because when you're the only one standing in the mud, you stop waiting for someone else to show up. You become the one who stays. There's a kind of peace in that, not joy, not love, just acceptance. A truce between you and the whole. And every night I washed, not well, just enough, a tin basin, a rag, cold water that numbed more than it cleaned. I'd scrub my hands raw and still smell rot under my nails. My skin carried the scent, my clothes, my breath. It followed me to sleep and back again. One night I dreamed of a field with no graves, just wind and wheat and laughter I didn't recognize. I woke with tears in my eyes and dirt in my mouth. Still don't know which part was real. I still remember the weight of her, lighter than the others. So light I thought for a moment that she might rise instead of fall. She couldn't have been more than 16. Maybe younger. Her hair was the color of dust, braided down her back with a ribbon that still held its shape, lavender maybe, or gray with age. I never could tell in that light. The sky had been dim all week, the sun too shy to look down at us. They brought her early before the bell rang. No ceremony, just two men with their sleeves pulled over their hands like that would keep the death off their skin. They left her by the gate, didn't speak to me, didn't even wait to see if I'd take her. I stood there longer than I should have, just staring. She didn't look sick, not like the others. No boils, no swelling, no blood at the mouth, just stillness. The kind of stillness that makes your heart ache, because you know it should have been interrupted by breath, by laughter, by the flutter of an eyelid refusing to close. She wore a simple dress, frayed at the cuffs, dirt at the hem, one shoe missing. Her fingers were pale but not curled, not clenched. One hand was open, palm facing up, like she'd been waiting for someone to take it. The other was closed around a small scrap of cloth, white, stained at the corner but carefully folded. I didn't try to open it. Whatever it was hers. I figured it still was. That was the first grave I dug alone. Before then, I'd always had someone nearby, a helper, a watcher, a priest muttering prayers under his breath like he was trying to bargain with the wind. But not that day, just me and her and the dirt. I dug slowly. Not because I was tired, though I was, but because something about the air felt different. Thicker, like it wanted me to be careful. Like it knew that if I rushed, I might miss something that needed to be remembered. The soil was soft, damp from the morning rain. It clung to itself in long curls like ribbon. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to come, to stop me, to ask who she was. But no one did. I didn't know her name, still don't. There are rules about marking graves, but they only apply if someone brings a name with them. Most don't, just bodies, bundled like afterthoughts, as if once the breath leaves, so does the need for memory. But this girl, she still had her ring. It was small. Worn, a thin band of copper with a single nick near the base, like it had been caught on something once. Too plain to be for show, too snug to be borrowed. It wasn't the kind of thing you take off before sleeping. So either she never had the chance or she didn't expect to need it back. I noticed it when I was lowering her down. Her hand shifted slightly, just enough for the sun to catch the metal. A flicker, quick and cruel, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought about keeping it, not for greed. Not even for food, but to hold on to something. A token, proof that I wasn't just shoveling people into the earth and forgetting them, that she had been real, that I had seen her, but I didn't take it. I wrapped her hands together as gently as I could and placed the cloth on her chest. It felt wrong lowering her in, like setting down something delicate in the mud, like putting music into a box and closing the lid. I spoke to her, though I don't remember what I said, maybe just her age, maybe an apology, maybe nothing at all, just the sound of breath turned toward her as if that might matter in the end. The sky cracked above me. A crow called once, then flew off. The wind shifted. I filled the hole. And then I sat. Right there on the edge of the grave, with the shovel across my knees and my hands black with soil. I didn't move, not for minutes, not for the world. I just stared at the ground, at the tiny rise in the earth, and tried to convince myself that this was kindness. That burying someone well was a kind of prayer. That care mattered, even if no one saw it. But the truth is, I didn't bury her for her sake. I buried her for mine. Because if I'd done it poorly, rushed, careless, cruel, I would have felt it in my bones. The dirt would have remembered, the silence would have turned on me. That night I dreamed of her. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I believe in dreams that don't come from sleep. She stood at the edge of the graveyard, barefoot, her ribbon lifted by a breeze I couldn't feel. She didn't speak, just looked at me, not with anger, not with peace, just waiting. I tried to move toward her, but my legs were heavy, caught in something thick and unseen. I fell, and when I looked down, the dirt was gone. Water, a black pool rippling from where I'd landed, and she was gone. I woke with the taste of soil in my throat. The next morning I checked the grave. It hadn't shifted. The mound was untouched. No footprints, no broken twigs. Just a single crow feather, gray and bent, lying near the stone I hadn't carved. I took the feather, pressed it in between the pages of a book I couldn't read, carried it with me for weeks. I told myself it was a reminder, but it felt more like an agreement. Not all the dead leave you, some stay. In the curve of your spine when you bow your head, in the ache of your hands when you dig deeper than you need to, in the whisper behind your breath when you pass by a ribbon and don't know why your throat tightens. She was the first, but not the last. There were others. Dozens, hundreds, but she stayed. And every now and then I think of her ring. I wonder if it still rests on her finger, if the earth cradled it gently, if the worms moved around it, if someday someone will dig too deep in that old yard and find it, wonder whose it was, wonder if she was loved, she was buried like she mattered. And maybe that's all we get, not monuments, not songs, just a single act of care witnessed only by the wind. It's strange, I don't remember the names of most I buried, but I remember her hands, her hair, the faint smudge of ash across her cheek, like someone had tried to bless her before she fell, or maybe just held her too tightly. Sometimes I think we make a mistake trying to forget the faces. Thinking it protects us, but it doesn't. Forget too much and you start to believe the whole is empty, that what you're covering is just weight, just muscle and cloth and silence. But she wasn't silent, not entirely. Some part of her lingered in that ring, that cloth, that open hand. The way her body curled slightly as if she'd still been trying to hold on. She wasn't ready, neither was I never have been. You learn the body like a book. Not all at once, but over time, each chapter introduced in silence, each paragraph read in the weight of the limbs. You learn how the spine folds when it breaks, how the knees resist even in death. How the skin bruises in places no one will ever see. I used to flinch. The first few months I moved them gently, tried not to bend anything too far, not to twist what still looked human. I thought it was respect, maybe it was guilt, but guilt grows heavy and the body does not care. Eventually I stopped hesitating, not because I grew cruel, but because I had to. You can't afford tenderness when the sun is setting and there are 4 more to bury. Some bodies collapse easily, loose like the breath took everything with it. Others fight you. Rigor makes them stiff, stubborn. Arms frozen mid-reach, mouths open in protest, like they still haven't realized it's over. The joints are first to go. They snap sometimes if you aren't careful. Ankles, wrists, necks, delicate hinges in a door that no longer opens. I started wearing a cloth around my mouth not for the smell, but for the things I said to keep myself steady. Quiet curses, half-sung nonsense, anything to drown out the cracking. Then the skin. That's the part no one warns you about. It goes soft before it goes dry. At first they look like wax, smooth, pale, fragile, but give it a day in the heat or a night in the wet and the whole surface loosens. You reach to lift them and your hand comes away with more than it should. A layer, a memory, A warning. I learned to wrap them tighter, not out of kindness, out of fear. Fear that one day I wouldn't be able to tell where their skin ended and mine began. The smell became part of me. I tried to fight it. Washed with vinegar. Rubbed herbs into my sleeves, slept with mint beneath my nose, but it clung. It seeped into my hair, my fingernails, the creases of my knees. Even when I was alone, I could feel it following me like a ghost with a wet hand on my shoulder. People noticed. The baker stopped letting me queue with the others, left my bread on the step instead. The cobbler lost my boots. Even the priest held his breath when I passed. I became something between man and omen, not yet dead, but not entirely clean. Children pointed. Dogs barked. I stopped going to market. I started wearing gloves, crude things made of scrap linen and wax. They didn't help. If anything, they made it worse. The sweat inside mixed with the scent turned rancid. I peeled them off each night and stared at my palms, wondering how skin could look so dark without bruising. They weren't bruises, just soaked, deep, saturated from weeks of touching what should have been left untouched. One night I fell asleep in the chapel yard, not on purpose. I'd been digging since before dawn, no food, no pause, 7 bodies, all from the same cottage. Something bad had found them in their sleep. Or maybe it had waited until they were too tired to run. I was too tired, too. I sat down just for a moment, back against the chapel wall, shovel across my lap. The ground still smelled of lime and something else. Something faintly sweet, like rotted apples or old breath, and I drifted. In the dream, I was digging, but not a grave, not really. The soil was different, soft, black, endless. I kept digging, and it never filled. No matter how much I lifted, the hole stayed the same. And then I noticed my arms bare to the bone. My hands thin and gray like old bark. Still, I dug. The deeper I went, the colder it grew, not sharp cold, just empty, a vacuum of warmth. And in that cold I heard them, not voices, just breathe, dozens, hundreds, inhaling all at once, then silence, then again. A rhythm, slow and impossible. I stopped digging, but my hands didn't. They moved without me, like the shovel had grown roots into my wrist and it was choosing now. Choosing depth over rest, soil over sky. Then I saw my own face, not in a mirror, just across from me, lying in the hole, staring upward with open eyes and a mouth half full of dirt. I woke choking, gasping for air, spitting out soil, though there was none. My throat burned and my hands were raw from where I'd clenched them. I looked down and found myself kneeling in a half-dug grave. It wasn't for anyone, no body, no wrapping, just me. The shovel lay beside me, sunk deep into the mound like it had planted itself. I didn't move for a long time. I watched the stars, listened to the breeze, tried to remember what day it was, who I was. But there was nothing in me left to call me, just the sound of dirt being remembered by the hand. When I finally stood, my knees cracked like branches. My back refused to straighten fully. I picked up the shovel and carried it home like a cradle, not because I cared for it, but because I didn't know what else to do. That night, I didn't wash. I lay in bed, the filth still on my skin, the dream still behind my eyes. I stared at the ceiling until the dark turned gray and the bells rang again, and I went back, because where else could I go? There's a myth people like to believe that work, even ugly work, keeps you human. That routine saves you, anchors you. I used to believe it too, but this wasn't routine. This was ritual, a slow burial of myself, one breath at a time. I stopped speaking unless spoken to. Stopped eating unless handed food. Stopped looking people in the eye. It was easier to pretend they were bodies waiting to fall. That way the transition would hurt less. Sometimes I caught my reflection in a window or the sheen of a basin. I didn't recognize it. The cheeks were hollow, the eyes sunken, the mouth too still, too soft, like it hadn't smiled in years. It hadn't. I began to wonder if part of me had died already. If maybe you don't need to stop breathing to be buried, maybe all it takes is forgetting the sound of your own laughter, or the feel of clean sheets, or the warmth of a hand that doesn't recoil. My hands turned black before my soul did. That's what I tell myself. Because the soul, well, it's harder to see, but the hands, they were proof. a map of what I'd touched, a record of what I'd given up. Each line packed with dirt, each scar a sentence I never spoke aloud. They said the plague would pass, that God would remember us, that the bells would ring for weddings again. I didn't believe them, not because I was faithless, but because I'd seen too much, too many eyes wide open, too many arms frozen mid-reach, too many children buried with toys in their hands. You can't pray away a graveyard, you can only dig it well. It didn't start with trumpets, or warnings, or signs in the sky. It started with three bodies laid out by the chapel wall in the cold dawn light, no names, no prayers, just bundled cloth and the smell of something that had waited too long. One of them was a girl I recognized, red hair, missing front teeth, always shouted when she ran through the square. The other two were men, or had been. I didn't ask questions. I dug. By nightfall, there were 20 more. They came in carts, in wheelbarrows, in arms. Some were dropped at the gate like old laundry, others left leaning against walls as if they might still be sitting there in the morning. People stopped pretending. They didn't ring the bell, didn't bow their heads, didn't cross themselves. They just dropped the dead and left. I didn't know what it was. No one did. Just a word whispered like a curse, plague. I'd heard it before in stories. But stories don't stink like that. They don't cough blood or blacken skin or hollow out villages by the week. Stories don't stack corpses. But the plague did. I remember the day I stopped counting. It was midsummer, or near enough, the air thick and wet, like it had soaked in every death and had nowhere left to drip. I had just buried a man whose chest had split open when we tried to move him. He'd been dead a day, maybe less, but already soft, already sunken. The next body arrived before I could fill the hole, then 2 more. Then 5. By dusk the yard was full, and still they came. I stopped counting, stopped carving names into scraps of wood, stopped trying to space the graves like the priest said. There wasn't time, there wasn't room, so I dug deeper and wider. The churchyard grew. We tore up hedges, burned trees, flattened stone. Every inch of earth became a bed for the breathless, mass graves, wide, long, pitiless. I tried to keep them separate, a child here, a mother there, but after a while you can't tell. The cloths blend, the limbs blur. And the stench makes you forget they were ever people at all. The priest stopped coming. Said it was too dangerous, that his prayers worked just as well from behind closed doors. He lit candles in the window. That was his offering. I wanted to light the whole chapel on fire. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, or if I did, it didn't matter. One night bled into the next like fever sweat on a dying man's brow. I'd close my eyes and wake up digging. Sometimes I wasn't sure if I'd ever stopped. There was no rhythm anymore, just frenzy. My hands blistered, then burst, then bled, then calloused over. My back knotted into something that throbbed even when I sat still, which wasn't often. My knees swelled, my nails darkened. I looked like something half-finished and not well started to begin with. The dreams changed too. No longer visions of my own grave. Now it was faces, hundreds of them, staring up at me, mouths open, not accusing, just waiting, waiting to be covered, waiting to be remembered, waiting for me to stop looking. I never did. I started hearing things, not voices, not full ones anyway, just murmurs in the wind, whispers beneath the soil, the snap of twigs where no trees stood, the creak of doors that hadn't opened in weeks. The mind breaks in small ways like bone under slow pressure, a whisper here, a shadow there. And then one day the shovel doesn't feel heavy anymore because your arms have forgotten what rest is. I began to talk out loud, not to the dead, not to God, just to the dirt. This one's small, I'd say, will put you near the edge, or you don't smell as bad as the last one, or tell me if this hurts. The words didn't make sense, they didn't need to. They filled the space where silence tried to rot me from the inside. The worst was the children. They kept their shoes on, their hands small, their eyes still round and swollen. Most were wrapped hastily, a sheet, a coat, a sack. One came in a cradle. I buried it whole, didn't unwrap it, didn't want to know. The wind began to carry ash. Somewhere nearby, someone had tried to burn the bodies, thought fire might scare death away. But the smoke only made it worse, the air thick with the scent of hair and meat and sin. I tried to wear rags over my mouth, but breathing through cloth is still breathing. And every breath felt like an invitation. I started coughing, not often, just enough to remind me I still could. There was a moment, I remember it too clearly, when I found myself standing in the pit, not on the edge, not beside it, in it, waist deep in corpses, my arms full of someone's sister or son or stranger. I looked around and I was alone. The cart was empty, the sun had set, the bells didn't ring. And I thought for a heartbeat too long that maybe I was dead too, that maybe this was it, a quiet descent unnoticed. But then the body shifted in my arms, not by itself, just gravity, just memory. And I realized I was still breathing. I dropped him, I climbed out, I kept digging. The water in the village turned foul, the well choked with something dark and soft. I drank from rain barrels, boiled it when I could. Or didn't. My stomach stopped complaining weeks before, it knew better. My skin peeled in places. My teeth ached, my eyes swelled from the smoke. I didn't recognize my reflection anymore, so I stopped looking. I must have looked like a ghost, maybe that's why the villagers stopped coming. They still left the bodies, but not by hand. They rolled them from carts, dragged them with ropes, pushed them off sleds and turned their backs before I could wave. I didn't blame them. I smelled like the plague. I was the plague to them, not a man, not a worker. Just the thing that moved death from one hole to another. The priest finally stopped lighting candles. His windows stayed dark. I heard he took ill, or fled, or died clutching his incense, begging saints that had stopped listening. Either way, he was gone, and I was still here. The worst night came without a moon. I'd buried 12. My back was broken, though I still walked. My hand bled where the shovel slipped. I stood at the edge of the newest pit and felt the world tilt, just slightly, not enough to fall, but enough to wonder what it would feel like to lie down, to let the soil take me without protest, to become the 13th, but I didn't. I dug because there was one more, always one more. And somewhere in the haze, I realized, the plague didn't knock. It never asked permission. It didn't care for doors or titles or prayers. It didn't care if you believed, if you confessed, if you washed your hands or wept for your neighbors. It came because it could, because we were soft, because we had grown used to being spared, but now it was our turn, and I was the usher, the last one left to lower the curtain. There's a moment when even the dirt says no. I didn't think it could. I thought the earth was endless, a bottomless throat swallowing what we no longer needed. But after the 50th pit or the 100th, something shifted. The ground changed. It started with roots. Long, pale things like sinews beneath the skin, coiled and clinging to everything. I'd cut one and 5 more would rise. They curled around my shovel, slid beneath the bodies like hands. It was as if the trees had started to defend the dead or trap them. I told myself it was natural, just the way things grow, but some roots bled when I cut them. A red so dark it looked black in the light. The second sign was the water. It rained, yes, but not enough to explain the flooding. The soil filled with damp. Pits collapsed before I could finish them. Graves turned to soup. I lowered one man and he floated back to the surface by morning, arms wide, mouth open, as if he'd changed his mind. I buried him again. He floated again. The third time I tied a stone to his chest, and still I dreamed of him knocking on the chapel wall. The days blurred. I stopped counting them. The sun rose and fell like a trick of the sky, neither warm nor bright nor trustworthy. My hands were blistered leather. My nails cracked. I hadn't felt my toes in weeks. I started stacking them. 3 deep, then 4, arranged like firewood, side by side, limb over limb, no more space, no more ceremony. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd bury children between strangers, pressed so tightly you couldn't tell where one ended, I'd have spat at them. But here I was, folding corpses like letters never sent. I stopped asking who they were. No one came to tell me anyway. No trinkets, no names, just linen-wrapped proof of another loss, the faces blurred. The hair, the hands, the scars, all became details I couldn't afford to remember. Because memory began to hurt more than the shovel. I tried to mark the pits, scratched lines into bark, stacked stones. drew circles in ash. But the rain took the ash, the wind toppled the stones, and the trees grew quiet, no birds, no rustle, just stillness like even the leaves were mourning. Sometimes I spoke to the holes before I covered them. Sorry, or you're not alone, or nothing at all. I don't know if anyone heard, not the dead, not God, certainly not the living. They'd stopped visiting weeks ago. They left the bodies at the edge of the field now, didn't even enter the yard, just dropped them and ran. The worst were the mothers, not their bodies, their faces. When they stood far off, holding bundles they couldn't yet let go of, watching me, begging me silently to be kind, and I was, when I could be, but I was tired, and the ground refused to take them all. I started digging into old graves. Not on purpose, just ran out of space. The shovel would strike something soft or hollow or sharp. I'd flinch, pause, then keep going. It didn't matter anymore. The dead were eating the dead. I don't know when I began to feel it, that presence. It wasn't a person, not exactly, not a shadow either, but it was near. Always just behind me, just beyond the tree line, just beneath the soil. I told myself it was exhaustion. Lack of food, too little sleep, too many breaths of rot. But then it started to speak, not with words, not like that, but I'd feel it in my spine, in the curl of my toes, a pressure in the chest, like being watched by something that had never learned to blink. It didn't feel holy, it didn't feel evil either, just ancient, patient, something that knew this was its season and I was merely the one turning the wheel. Sometimes I'd turn suddenly, thinking I saw something move, a flicker at the edge of a grave, a twitch in the fog. But there was nothing, or maybe I was nothing. Hard to tell by then. I stopped wearing gloves, stopped scrubbing the dirt from my face, stopped rinsing my mouth with vinegar. What was the point? The stink was in me now. I carried it the way children carry songs they never learned the words to, humming what's left over and over. The shovel broke once, snapped at the neck. I stared at it for a long time, thought maybe that was the sign I'd been waiting for, the universe finally saying enough. But then I found a spade, rusted, short, chipped, and I kept going because no one else would. I hadn't spoken to another soul in days, maybe longer. I tried once to a boy who brought a body on a sled. I asked his name. He stared at me like I wasn't real. Like the dead man had risen to speak, he left without answering. Sometimes I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because silence weighs too much if you let it. The laugh would come, rough and dry, and echo off the trees like a cough. The presence seemed to like it. The deeper the grave, the louder it became. Not in volume, in feeling, like standing too close to a fire that never shows flames. My arms would tremble. My teeth would ache. I'd feel seen, but never comforted. It watched me when I slept, curled beneath the chapel eaves, shivering with my shovel across my chest like a knight with a broken sword. I'd wake gasping, unsure if the weight on my chest was breath, grief, or something older pressing down. The ground resisted. I'd dig and the soil would clump, refuse to move, stick to the blade like tar. I'd swing and it would ring against stone that wasn't there yesterday. I thought once in a fever that the earth was trying to keep the dead out, that it had finally grown tired of swallowing what we could not carry. I whispered to it once. If you don't take them, who will? It didn't answer, but the wind stopped. I began to dream in reverse, not of the dead, but of the living, of mothers cooking, of boys throwing stones, of the sound of church bells at weddings, of laughter that wasn't followed by coughing. I'd wake with tears on my cheeks and the taste of ash in my mouth. I didn't remember what I looked like. I didn't remember who I was before the shovel. Just that there had been a name once, and maybe it mattered, and maybe it didn't. Because now there was only one name left, the one they whispered when they left the bodies at the gate, not Gravedigger. Not man, just him. They feared me more than death, because I had touched it too many times and not yet fallen, because I knew how to stack their sins in rows and cover them without a prayer, because the ground no longer listened, and neither did I. I thought it would feel different. Burying your own blood, that should shake you, shouldn't it? That should be the grave that splits you down the middle. That should be the one that hurts, but it didn't, not in the way I expected. When they brought him to me, two boys I didn't know, dragging him by the heels like a sack of barley, I didn't recognize him at first. He was thinner, his face sunk in at the cheeks, his hair longer than I remembered, streaked with ash. His mouth was open and his jaw bent wrong, like he'd been trying to say something when he died. They dropped him hard. One of them looked at me like he expected me to thank him. I didn't. I waited until they left. Until the dust settled and the only sound was my own breath, short, dry, measured. Then I knelt beside the body. It was him, not a doubt, my brother. Older by 2 years. Born in a lean spring, named for a grandfather who drank too much and laughed too loud. He was louder than me, stronger than me, braver in the ways boys are, with fists and fast feet and charm. The kind of charm that got him extra stew and later, girls who thought they could fix him. We hadn't spoken in months. Last I heard, he joined a band of hired blades escorting wagons between towns, one of the few jobs that paid in more than lice and regret. He sent me nothing, not a coin, not a word, just silence. And now here he was, dead, bent, broken. I didn't cry, not then. I lifted him the way I'd lifted dozens before, one arm under the shoulders, one beneath the knees. He wasn't heavier than the rest, he wasn't lighter, he was just a body, and that hurt more than anything. He didn't want to be buried. He told me that once, years ago, when we were sitting by the river, skipping stones and dreaming of far-off places. He said he didn't trust the dirt, said he'd rather be burned. Let the fire take what the world didn't, he said, but we didn't have fire. The village pyre had collapsed weeks ago, the wood too wet, the stones cracked. The last time we tried to burn a corpse, it smoked and hissed and refused to catch. The body had to be buried half charred, as if even the flames had grown weary, so I did what I could. I wrapped him in our mother's shawl, the one she wore to market, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender and lard. I found it folded in my hut, tucked away beneath a board. I don't remember keeping it, but I had. I didn't tie his hands, didn't stuff his mouth with herbs, didn't cross his arms or smooth his brow. I just wrapped him, like a brother. Like a man too tired to fight the end, and I laid him beside the baker's wife. I don't know why I picked that spot. Maybe because it was quiet. Maybe because the tree overhead still had leaves, even now. Maybe because she was kind to us once, gave us cakes when we were small and didn't ask for coin. He liked her, I think, or maybe he just liked the way she laughed. I didn't speak, not even my usual muttered nothing. My throat was thick, not with tears, but with dust, the kind that settles in you, lives there. I covered him gently, slow, careful, no rush, no prayer. Just soil and breath and the sound of my own knees creaking as I knelt. I didn't mark the grave, not because I forgot, I could never forget, but because I didn't want anyone else to find it, not the boys who dropped him, not the priests who might pretend to bless him now. Not the wind that might carry his name to ears that didn't deserve it. It was his. And mine. When it was done, I sat for a while. I listened, not for voices, not for God, just for something, anything to break the silence. But there was nothing. Just the soft crunch of leaves under the weight of a sky that didn't care. Grief wasn't a thunderclap. It wasn't tears or wailing or fists to the chest. It was quiet. It was the moment after. When you realize there's no one left to tell, no one to explain it to, no one to say, he was mine, and hear them say, I know. I walked home in the dark, my legs numb, my hands black, my heart quieter than it had ever been. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, tracing the knots in the wood, remembering how he used to flick me behind the ear when I wasn't listening. How he once stole a hen for me on my name day, how he broke his toe falling off the mill roof and made me swear not to tell anyone. I remembered the last thing I said to him. Don't die, stupid, he'd laughed. You won't bury me anyway. He was wrong. I did, and I buried him well. The next morning I dug 6 more graves. One of them was for a child with blue socks, another for a man who smelled of wine and wax. I don't remember the others. Their faces blurred, but my brothers stayed. I saw him in the corner of my eye sometimes, leaning against a tree, sitting on a wall, watching me work, not judging, just watching, as if to say, still here, and I was still digging. Still breathing, still bending beneath a sky that never changed. Some days I touched the shawl wrapped around my shoulders, the same one I'd buried him in. Or maybe I'd found another. Or maybe I only dreamed I let it go. It's hard to tell now. Grief does that. It bends time, slips between memory and madness until both feel like truth. I never visited his grave again. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. Afraid I wouldn't find it, afraid I would, afraid I'd stop digging altogether. So I kept moving. Because if I stood still too long, I might remember that love doesn't make you lighter, it just makes the hole deeper, and I had too many graves left to dig. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I counted Tuesdays by the sound of the bell that didn't ring anymore. I hadn't planned to go to the church, not really. It wasn't some divine pull, some sudden guilt clawing at the ribs. I just started walking. My hands were still dirty, crusted with soil. My boots had lost one sole entirely. But I walked. Past the graves, past the gate, up the hill where the wind always felt colder, like even the air knew to hold its breath near God. I hadn't been inside in months, not since the first cart arrived. The chapel looked smaller than I remembered, crooked almost, as if it had leaned away from the world in shame. The stones were dark with rain and soot. The door shut tight, no smoke from the chimney, no candlelight behind the windows. I knocked, lightly at first, then harder, nothing. I stepped back, craned my neck, still nothing. Then I saw him, the priest, just a flicker of him through the cracks in the wooden slats above the door. He didn't move fast enough, our eyes met, he flinched, then disappeared. A few seconds later his voice came, muffled and sharp. "You shouldn't be here." I said nothing. "I mean it, step back, you're not clean." Still nothing from me. "I've heard stories," he said. "They say you don't bury them with rites, that you don't even pray." "They don't ask," I replied. Silence. I pressed my palm to the door gently. It didn't budge, the wood was warm from the sun. "I just came to speak." "You've already spoken too much," he said. "You carry death on your breath." "Maybe I do. You want to confess?" I thought about that. "Or maybe," I said, "I just wanted someone to look me in the eyes." He didn't answer, not then, not ever. I waited a while, long enough for the sun to shift, long enough to feel the sweat cool on my back. Then I turned and walked back to the graves. That night I wrote my own confessions in my head. They started simple. "Forgive me, Father, for I have buried too many to remember. Forgive me for giving names to the ones who came without them. Forgive me for laughing when the priest locked the doors and called it holiness." Later, the confessions grew stranger. "Forgive me, for I've stopped believing the dead want saving. Forgive me, for the only angels I've seen wear rags and no shoes. Forgive me, for I've blessed the worms and cursed the candles." I imagined myself standing in the pulpit, my shovel crossed over my chest like a holy relic, a bishop of bones, congregation of the forgotten. The pews filled with wrapped bodies, heads bowed, mouths open, waiting for a sermon that didn't lie. I'd say things like, "Dust to dust, but never to silence," or "Blessed are the sleepless, for they have seen the whole of the night," or "God's not gone, just hiding." And they'd nod. The dead, patient, understanding, better than the living, who only ever saw me when they needed something buried. Sometimes, when the sky was bruised and the crows had nothing left to steal, I'd make little crosses out of twigs and place them behind the chapel. For me, for them, for whatever was listening. I called them my ghost congregation, 12 rows of no one. I'd preach softly into the dirt. "Today's reading is from the book of Backs broken under load." I'd smile. Not big. Just enough to feel my face remember how. Once I did laugh, not loud, never loud, but real. It came when I found a body with coins still sewn into the hem of her skirt, 4 silver pieces, untouched. She'd gone to the grave with more wealth than I'd earned in months. I held them in my hand a long while, felt their weight. Then I buried them with her. I wasn't a thief, not yet. Besides, what would I buy? A better shovel? No, I buried the coins and whispered, "Spend it well if there's a market on the other side." There was power in saying these things aloud, not magic, just defiance. The kind that makes a man still feel like a man, even when the world has forgotten to call him one. The priest never opened the door again. I came back once, just to see, just to prove something. This time I didn't knock. I left a small pile of stones by the threshold. 7 stacked carefully, one for each night I'd gone without sleep. A message only I would understand. That week the wind broke the church's weathercock clean off, spun it like a toy before casting it into the graveyard. I kept it. It sits by my bed now. Rusted, crooked, useless, but still turning when the wind is strong enough. I think that's what faith is now, not trust, not obedience, just movement, even after you're broken. The next time someone asked if I believed in God, I said yes. But only in the kind that forgets your name so you can make a new one. I still speak to the bodies. Sometimes they speak back, not in words, in the way their arms fall, in the way their shoes are tied. In the bruises no one else thought to cover. That's their confession. And I hear it. I absolve them all, everyone, even the thief, even the butcher, even the man who came to me missing 3 fingers and smelling of guilt. I give them the only blessing I have left. You are done now. Let the dirt remember what the world could not. And I dig. Because if the church won't open its doors, someone has to. I didn't fall. Falling would have meant surprise. I folded, like a blanket left out in the cold too long, stiff, tired, and without ceremony. My knees gave first, then my arms. The shovel hit the ground with a thud, or maybe that was my head. Hard to say. The sky blurred, the trees swayed. The ground came up and held me like it had been waiting. It was cold that day, not the kind that stings, no, that would have meant life. This cold was ancient, heavy, the kind that lives beneath the bones. I'd felt it before, brushing off corpses, prying frozen fingers apart to tie the cloth, but I'd never felt it inside me, not like that. No one came, of course they didn't. Who would have noticed I was gone? The priest had locked himself behind holy wood. The villagers stopped looking weeks ago. Even the birds had fled the trees, leaving behind a silence that pressed into your lungs like smoke. I tried to call out. Nothing came. Just breathe. Thin, useless breath. A whimper of a thing. I lay there for I don't know how long. The sun shifted, or maybe it didn't. My body stopped marking time. But my mind, oh, my mind wandered. I saw faces, not mine. Theirs, all of them, lined up along the edge of the graveyard, staring down with hollow eyes and broken mouths. Wrapped in linen, still, but not still, they blinked, not all at once, just now and then, like breathing. They didn't speak, didn't judge, just watched, patient, familiar, the way your own shadow might if it finally grew tired of being behind you. I tried to move, my fingers twitched. The rest stayed. Then the dirt shifted beside me, not much, just a crumble. A sigh. I turned my head slow, like it was made of wet rope, and saw it, a hole, shallow, just enough space for a man too tired to finish what he started. Had I dug it, maybe. I didn't remember, but the spade was nearby, its blade still warm from my hand or someone else's. I crawled, not far, just enough to slide my arm over the edge. My chest followed. My knees dragged. Inch by inch, the earth pulling me in like breath. I didn't resist. It was soft, comforting, almost, like being rocked. The grave held me with a kind of kindness the world had forgotten. No pressure, no expectation. Just soil and silence and something deep beneath the roots that hummed like a lullaby. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is how it ends. Not with blood or prayers or someone weeping over your name, just a slow descent into a hole you dug yourself. And then I heard the whisper. It wasn't loud. Barely a sound. More like wind trapped in a jar or breath held too long, but it said my name. Not the one they called me now, the old one. the one only my mother used, the one I'd buried years ago, thinking it had no place here. That name hurt to hear. It made my spine jolt, my fingers clawed at the dirt. I remembered suddenly that I was alive, that this wasn't sleep, that the ground was not a bed, that death would not wait for a better day. I tried to stand, failed, tried again. This time I rose half out, half in, dirt clinging to my ribs like hands. I vomited, nothing but bile. My body convulsed like it wanted to leave without me. The grave yawned behind me, open and quiet, disappointed. I crawled from it, sat against a stone, breathed, and the faces, they were gone, just grass now and graves. And the wind pressing gently against my ear as if to say, not yet. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was weeping and I didn't have tears left. Haven't for weeks, maybe months. I'd been hollowed out, used up, a husk in borrowed skin. I looked at my hands. They were black again, not from rot, not yet, but from blood and soil and frostbite creeping in. My fingers didn't feel like mine. They flexed too slowly, like they needed permission. That night I didn't go home. Just sat beneath the tree near the chapel, knees drawn up, listening. I heard things. Voices, songs, my mother calling from a field I hadn't seen in 20 years. My brother whistling a tune he never finished. A girl laughing, maybe the one with the ribbon. And underneath it all, the whisper, not angry, not kind, just constant, like it had been waiting. Watching. Walking beside me through every grave, every frost, every cracked rib and silenced name. I used to think death was the end. Now I think it's a companion, not friendly, not cruel, just always there. The only one who never looked away. By morning the wind had changed. It came from the south, warm and foul. The trees leaned toward it like they were listening. The graves smelled sweeter than they should have. Decay rising like breath. I stood, my legs ached, my knees screamed, but I stood. Because no one else would dig the morning's dead, and because I knew now the grave I'd made for myself was too shallow, it wouldn't hold me, not yet, and so I walked back to the gate, picked up the shovel, pressed my forehead to the worn handle, whispered to it like an old friend, another day then. And the wind whispered back, yes. When I finally died, I think I did, there were no bells. No final breath held like a secret, no candle. No hands on my face to smooth the lines or close the eyes. Just the wind and the shovel and the quiet. It might have been morning or dusk or one of those gray hours in between that no longer asked for names. I don't remember what stopped first, the heart, the breath, the thoughts, only that something let go, something deep. And the world kept moving. No one came to find me. I was out near the far edge of the yard where the soil had grown sour and even the worms had left. I'd been digging, of course I had. One more grave, one more breath before the earth swallowed it. I don't think I finished the hole. I must have sat down thinking I'd just rest, just close my eyes for a moment, let the air settle on my chest, but I never got back up. They found me the next day or the one after that, face down in the dirt, arms out like I'd been reaching for something I'd dropped. Maybe I had, maybe it was me, they didn't know who I was. Or maybe they did and chose not to say, just another man in the death field. Another wrapped weight to lower without questions. No ring, no ribbon, no parchment tucked in a coat with a name scrawled in shaking ink. I'd given up carrying one. Names meant something when you had someone to speak them, but I hadn't heard mine aloud in months. The sound had faded from my memory like breath on cold glass. They buried me in the same yard I'd bled into, dug into, cursed and wept and broken in, maybe even in the same pit I had meant for someone else. There's a strange kind of poetry in that. No one marked it, no stone, no twig cross, not even a pile of rocks to keep the animals from sniffing too close. Just dirt, damp, unbothered, folded back over a man who'd given it everything and asked for nothing. I watched for a time, not from above, not below, just near. As if death had a porch you could sit on, watching the world pass by like a cart on a muddy road. I saw them lift me awkwardly, quickly, trying not to touch too much. I was heavy. I always had been, even when I was thin. Some people carry weight in the body. Others carry it in the way they're remembered. I had neither now. The man who dropped the shovel beside my grave wasn't the priest. He died weeks before. This was someone younger. His hands weren't blistered, his shoulders weren't bent. He didn't know yet how deep the holes went. I hoped he'd learn gently, but I knew he wouldn't. No one wept, no one spoke. I heard no prayers. They covered me in silence, and that felt right. It was silence I'd lived in, silence I'd worked through. It had coated me thicker than the soil. It had stayed even when my name hadn't. And now it settled over me one last time, like a blanket tucked by a hand that didn't know it was tucking. I watched the yard for days, or years. Time is strange when you've stopped counting it. The grass grew, then withered, then grew again. The stones cracked, the trees bowed deeper toward the graves. Birds returned, just a few, and sang songs I almost remembered. No one visited my grave, how could they? They didn't know where to look. I thought for a while that someone might come, a child I'd once helped across a stream, a woman who'd whispered thanks in passing, a boy who'd watched me from behind a shutter, too afraid to wave, but they didn't. And that, too, felt right. I had made myself disappear long before death did it for me. Shovel by shovel, name by name. Funny thing, memory, you think it fades slow, a gentle slipping, but it vanishes in a breath and no one sees it go. There was a time long ago when I believed in stories, that those who served were remembered. That sacrifice sang in the bones of the earth. But now I know the earth forgets, not out of cruelty, just the way the sea smooths stone. I wonder what they said about me, if anything at all. Maybe he dug well, or he never spoke much, or simply, he lasted longer than we thought, and that would be enough. Because what else do we leave behind? Names fade, faces vanish, even the bones crack and melt in the weight of time. But the holes stay, not just the ones in the ground, the ones in others. In the way they look at the sky a little longer, in the way they flinch at silence. Maybe someone will pass my grave one day, step over it without knowing, and feel, just for a moment, the weight of all I buried. Maybe that's memory too, not names, not stories, just weight and silence. And the knowledge that someone once held the world's grief in their hands and did not let it fall. If you're still listening, you've touched the shovel too. Maybe not with your hands, maybe not in the dark earth or the bitter frost or the back-breaking ache that comes when the sky forgets you. But you've felt it, haven't you? That weight, that silence. That moment when no one else comes, so you go instead. I know you have. Because you're still here, you've heard what I buried, and more than that, you've stayed long enough to carry some of it. That's more than most ever did for me. People think death is loud, that it comes with bells, screams, thunder in the distance, but it doesn't, not most of the time. Most of the time, it's soft. It slips in while you're looking somewhere else. It lingers in corners. It makes tea with your grief and waits for you to sit down beside it. That's what the grave taught me, not about endings, about presence, about the weight of staying. You know now what it was like, not the dates, not the causes, not the priest's record scratched into fading vellum. You know the texture of the cloth, the smell of the limbs, the way dirt settles different on the dead than it does on the living. You know the sound of a shovel in silence. That's not nothing. It's not everything either, but it's what I had to give. I used to think I'd be remembered for the number of graves. That maybe someone would tally them, 1, 2, 100, too many, and write it down. That somewhere in a monastery or a hall or a dusty back room there'd be a scroll that read, "Here lay the man who kept the dead from crowding the streets." But no scroll came. No ink, no witness, just the wind, just the shovel. And now, just you. I don't know your name, I don't know your face. Maybe you're listening from a world where dirt comes in bags and graves are green with perfect grass. Maybe your dead wear shoes and wait for stone to mark them. But I know this, if you've come this far, you've carried something. A memory, a burden, a stillness. And I want to thank you for that. No one ever did for me. They brought me their silence, their fear, their eyes full of don't look too long. They offered no coins, no prayers, just backs turned and footsteps quickening. And I, fool that I was, took it all. I thought maybe that was grace, but grace, I think now, is smaller. Quieter, it's in the folding of a shawl, in a grave dug deep enough for the cold. In the way a stranger, years later, might whisper thank you into the wind and not know why. I didn't survive the work, let's be clear about that. My body broke slowly, not with blood, but with bending. My mind hollowed like the skulls I buried. And my soul, well, if I still have one, it must be buried under 1,000 names I never knew. But the story did. That much I can feel. It didn't rot. It didn't sink. It rose slow, like steam from warm bread, like breath in a cold room, like something waiting for the right ears. Yours, perhaps. Maybe that's why I'm here. Not to be saved, not to be honored, just to be heard, so I can fade properly. Not in pieces, whole. There's something sacred in being listened to, even now, even from beneath the earth. I've told you things I never told the priest, never told my brother, never whispered into the ribs of the wind. You know the shape of my hands now, the crack of my knees. The things I saw when no one else would look. You know the names I made up for the dead, just so they wouldn't go nameless into the dirt. You know the songs I hummed to myself, tuneless and trembling. You know what it means to dig until your fingers bleed and your memory goes quiet. And you stayed. Not many did. Not even me toward the end. Sometimes I wonder if I really died that day, or if I just lay down in the hole I'd made and let the world walk past. But it doesn't matter, does it? Because here you are, and here I am. And that means something. I'd ask for forgiveness, for the bodies I rushed, for the names I forgot, for the times I laughed when I shouldn't have. But I no longer believe forgiveness is something owed. It's something found. Maybe this is part of it. You hearing this. You letting the silence settle in your chest and not running from it. That's enough. I don't need a name on a stone. I don't need a song or a bell. I just needed one person to carry the sound of my voice past the yard, past the frost, past the mouths that sealed shut too soon. You've done that, and that makes you the last gravekeeper in a way, even if your hands are clean, even if your bed is soft. Even if you're lying there now, eyes half closed, barely listening, that's enough, because you stayed, because you let me speak. And because in the quiet that follows this, you'll remember not all of it, not perfectly, but something. A line, a breath, the way the dirt clung to my palms. And maybe, the next time you pass a field or a cemetery or just a patch of quiet earth where no one speaks anymore, you'll feel it. The weight, the silence, the work, and you'll know someone was there, someone who tried to keep the world from rotting too fast, someone who dug deep, even when no one asked him to. Even when they stopped asking altogether. That was me. And now it's you too. Sleep well.